slaves.
No, stop, please! What are you doing? Please, stop! Please, stop! No! No! Don't do anything!
Roman slaves were the lowest social class and had no official marriage, legal protection, or ownership rights. Their owners were open to killing and punishing them. Three kinds of slaves were prominent in Roman history, depending on what they did and where they worked. They were private slaves, who worked in public, and household slaves who worked on villas or large farming lands. The typical lifespan for a person to stay in Roman slavery was over 30 years. However, it depended on the time when they became slaves. Some were captured as war soldiers, some were sons of the slaves, and few as criminals for punishment. Whatever the source of slavery was, the life of each Roman slave was no less than hell. Let's dig deeper into how a typical Roman slave was forced to spend his day. A Roman slave's day started before sunrise, when they had to wake up before their owner. After that, they helped them dress up and prepare for the day. When the owners left for work after breakfast, the slaves used to get breakfast opportunities. They were considered cheap and bland, so they were given very little food to eat. The breakfast they ate was exclusively based on grains. A piece of bread can be complimentary on a lucky day. Poor slaves used to get boiled wheat, which they turned into porridge. Often, the leftovers of the owners included figs, olives, and scraps of bread that the slaves used to put on the porridge as seasoning. Some slaves appointed to households got better food, but it was not as lavish as the owners ate. Gladiator slaves were best fed among all classes of slaves because they had to fight for their masters. They were even roasted meats, fresh cheese, egg, goat milk, and a highly proteinaceous diet to stay strong and serve for the whole day. Aside from the extravagance and patheticness of the breakfast, the slaves only got time to eat once a day. The lucky one could eat 3 times a day at festivals or religious events. After breakfast, the household slaves performed daily tasks like cleaning the home, gardening, washing clothes, and bringing goodies to the cooks to prepare daily meals. Some of them used to walk children to school. Are you thinking, what about the education of the slaves? Most of them brought to Rome were neither educated nor sent to school. They were taught the skills to perform their daily duties, like how to sew, cook, attend to guests, and work on the farm and herding the livestock. Moreover, they were taught skills like baking, metalworking, carpentry, and pottery to make money for the owners. However, not all masters were the same. Some sent their slaves to get quality education at their expense to help them in financial affairs or handling complex organizations. If guests arrived at their owners, the slaves opened the doors, made seating arrangements, prepared food, and served drinks like grape wines to them. Moreover, they escorted the guests when they left the home of their owners and followed them with torches if they were traveling at night. But what about the social relations of the slaves? They had no right to make relationships without the consent of their owners. Their friendships were limited to the pupils, managers, and people in business they met at the workplace. Household slaves were limited to the family of their owners. Some started families through conternium, an unofficial marriage. Since the state never considered their marriage legal, they enjoyed no legal protections. The lives of slaves were miserable. Every day they carried their owners on human-powered vehicles like litter and mounted chairs. They accompanied their owners during business trips and visits. Moreover, they held oil-filled torches during night travels to enlighten the way through dark streets. Household slaves' jobs were less hectic than the farm slaves, who began the work early in the morning and continued till sunset. Many slaves worked in the same routine every day. They watered crops, plowed fields, and excavated furrows without any rest. They were never given a day off, except for religious festivals. During the hectic day, Roman slaves got no time for themselves. They had no right to have a personal life, own property, or have free kids. Their kids became the slaves of the owners. For farm slaves, personal time was more limited, and they celebrated their festivals only with their owners. After serving their owners for the whole day, the slaves returned to their quarters present with the urban homes of the owners. Some slaves were treated well, and provided personal living quarters with cots or blankets to sleep on. Some of them slept in kitchens associated with cooks, and those who cleaned stables remained in houses at night. Some lucky slaves were provided the right to marry to meet the staffing demands of households. Highly trusted were kept near houses and villas in barrack-like buildings with small cells. Farm slaves were kept chained at night because they were prisoners. Most of the barracks were kept dark, but had slits in the walls to let some beams of light pass in. The people of the Roman Empire considered the slaves to have the lowest status, and their appearance reflected it. Every day, they have to wear a loosely fitted tunic of coarse wool, wooden slippers, and a cloak. The head of farm workers was not allowed to shave to make wigs for the upper class. Roman slaves were not allowed to wear a toga because it was reserved for official Romans only. Do you think slaves did all this for free? No. Although they were the properties of their owners, they got paid for what they did. Roman slaves' owners gave them peculium as money or property for the slave as a wage for their service for staying away from home. Slaves had complete control of the peculiar. The owners rewarded some slaves for their services for good work. Moreover, they generated some income by selling the leftovers from household meals or events. You might be thinking that only slaves that could serve their owners were kept at their houses and workplaces to serve. However, child slaves were also a class, and their number rose uncontrolled during the Pax Romana period. Child slaves don't have much work because they're weak physiques, so their owners let them live like Roman children. They were well educated and trained depending on how kind and wealthy their owner was. Despite the miserable life, the slaves were allowed to worship freely daily. They were allowed to visit the temples built inside houses because they were considered part of the house. In some households, a separate lalarium was made for the slaves to worship. However, the household and slaves celebrated the festivals together. No political and social rights were provided to slaves. They never held any office in the empire and had no authority over the Romans. They were just to serve the owners and emperors and work under local administration. The everyday task of Roman slaves was limited to libraries, public markets, post offices, and treasuries. Cruel owners used to beat the slaves to death, but nobody could stop them because no legal protection laws were made for slaves. Moreover, the slaves were chained day and night to make every possibility to escape impossible. They were treated like animals, and the humiliation of human rights was at its peak. Many slaves used to die during the punishments induced by their cruel owners. Those who were caught as prisoners of war were kept chained, and a necklace of iron was put on their neck. Some of the most cruel ones used spiky neck belts on their slaves to prevent their escape. Their life was made more miserable when the owners used them for their pleasures. When a slave died during slavery, the owners did everything to bury him properly because Romans considered the person's soul get peace when adequately buried in a grave. The slave's burial was as sacred as any man of the Roman Empire. Alas, they got the status of humans, but just after death when nothing remains. Do you know the slaves were allowed to free themselves? Yes, they got rid of the ownership of the master if they paid a fee equal to what their master spent on them. Therefore, slaves worked day and night to collect the fee for their freedom to get a peaceful life. The life of the Roman slave was nothing more than an ill-fated story written with a dark pen from the cursed part of hell. That's how cruel humans can become to fellow beings.